They were supposed to suppress a rebellion. They thought it was just another foreign campaign, dangerous perhaps, but nothing extraordinary. Instead, they found themselves in the heart of an empire that wanted them dead. This is not a story of conquest, it's a story of survival. In 401 BCE, 10,000 Greek soldiers answered a call they barely understood, led not by a general but by ambition, by gold, by promise, by pride. Among them was a man who had never led an army, never drawn a strategic line across a map, never dreamed he'd have to keep thousands alive in enemy lands. His name was Xenophon. What unfolded would become one of the most harrowing, inspiring, and unlikely odysseys in military history. A retreat not of weakness but of discipline, not of shame but of resilience. And in the end, a march that would echo through centuries. Let's walk beside them step by step. Through deserts, over mountains, into betrayal, snow, blood, and brotherhood. Because sometimes the greatest victories come when no one is watching. And the most powerful stories are the ones of those who simply refuse to give up. As the final breath left King Darius II in 404 BCE, a hush fell over the vast Persian Empire, a silence pregnant not with mourning, but with a question that echoed through the gilded halls of Persepolis. Who would now grasp the scepter? Who would command the beating heart of this formidable realm? His eldest son, Artaxerxes II, was crowned. The transition appeared seamless, a gilded tableau of power transferring without a ripple of discontent, without the stain of a single drop of blood. Or so it seemed. Yet the veneer of Persian politics was as deceptive as a mirror's surface. Beautiful, reflecting an image of tranquility but dangerously fragile, concealing a maelstrom of ambition and intrigue beneath. Far from the bustling heart of the royal court, in the sun-drenched western satrapies, another sun watched with a gaze as sharp as a newly honed blade. This was Cyrus the Younger, and the crown had not been placed upon his head. He was a governor, yes, a satrap with sprawling lands and countless men under his command. But in the intricate tapestry of Persia, satrapies were never mere administrative posts. They were miniature kingdoms, and Cyrus ruled his with a fierce independence, a king in all but name. He possessed soldiers loyal and formidable. He commanded silver enough to fuel the grandest ambitions. And he held something far more potent, more insidious than either, a vision. While Artaxerxes reveled in the pomp and circumstance of his coronation in the majestic Persepolis, Cyrus was not celebrating, he was calculating. He understood that distance bred delay, and in delay he recognized not a hindrance but an opportunity, a precious window to forge his own destiny. He began to gather his forces, not with ostentatious displays that would alert the watchful eyes of the imperial court, but through the subtle dance of whispers, the clandestine exchange of letters, and the judicious distribution of gifts. These were the preparations that never appeared on official maps, the quiet machinations that, when brought to fruition, had the power to irrevocably shift the very fate of empires. Some whispered that his actions were fueled by annoying jealousy, a bitterness at being overlooked. Others believed he harbored a deeper conviction, a profound belief that he was the stronger, the smarter, the truly worthier brother to wear the crown. Whatever the truth, this was never merely a struggle for power. This was about legacy. And Cyrus, with a fire burning in his formidable spirit, had no intention of allowing history to be penned without his name etched boldly, indelibly, into its every page. What would be his next audacious move? He would seek allies not among his own people, for he knew the Persian court too well, but across the vast, azure expanse of the sea. In a land fractured by ceaseless conflict yet brimming with hardened warriors, mercenaries eager for a righteous cause, or perhaps simply for a coin. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion. The world held its breath, unknowing of the storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that would shake the very foundations of the Persian Empire and forever alter the course of ancient history. Cyrus the Younger, with a cunning that belied his age, understood a fundamental truth about power. Rebellions are not declared, they are meticulously engineered. He knew that to openly unfurl banners of defiance or to bellow calls for civil war would be an act of suicidal folly. Instead, his approach was one of insidious charm and calculated generosity. He hosted lavish banquets, wrote polite, almost deferential letters and whispered promises of promotions, and cleared debts into the ears of influential men. To the discerning Persian nobles, he spoke only of minor disturbances in the distant provinces, rebellious tribes perhaps in need of swift and decisive discipline. To his inner circle of courtiers, he insisted that every action, every subtle maneuver was in loyal service to the newly crowned king. But behind this carefully constructed facade of allegiance, his true strategy was unfurling like a quiet, yet inexorable symphony of disloyalty. He had learned well from the intricate dance of his father's court. Open defiance was a guaranteed path to the executioner's block. But ambition, carefully cloaked in feigned loyalty, was the very key to survival and ultimately triumph. His seat of power, the ancient city of Sardis, was far from a dusty frontier outpost. It was a jewel of the empire, rich, strategically vital, and critically close enough to the restless city-states of Greece to offer something no traditional Persian army could ever hope to match. The formidable Greek hoplites. Cyrus had witnessed them in action, these bronze-clad warriors, and their image was burned into his memory. Unlike the vast, often unwieldy Persian infantry, trained in mass formations but prone to breaking under sustained pressure, the Greeks fought in tight, disciplined phalanxes. They did not scatter, they did not flinch. They moved with a terrifying unity, a single mind of bronze and muscle, an irresistible force. And most importantly, to a man of Cyrus's ambition and resources, they were for hire. The timing, it seemed, was exquisitely perfect. Greece itself was still reeling from the brutal internecine conflict of the Peloponnesian War. Soldiers, hardened by years of relentless combat, were abundant. Peace, however, was a rare and fleeting commodity. Thousands of warriors found themselves adrift, without coin, without a noble cause, and without purpose. Cyrus offered all three, a lifeline thrown to men who had known nothing but the clang of steel and the roar of battle. He did not need a sprawling, unwieldy army. He needed a loyal one, a force that would march without question into the unknown and strike without a flicker of hesitation when the moment arrived. From his distant, gilded throne in Persepolis, Artaxerxes saw none of this. To him, Cyrus was merely a younger sibling, entrusted with a governor's duties, perhaps a manageable ego, but nothing more. He saw a man who would continue to serve the empire, never realizing that his brother was not merely an administrator, but a formidable warrior sharpening a dagger while wearing the most disarming of smiles. And he was about to recruit the blade that would pierce the very heart of the empire. 10,000 men, Greek, desperate, supremely skilled, would soon march under his banner. They would be known to history as the 10,000, a name that would echo through the centuries. But as they gathered their meager possessions and looked westward, they had no idea what they were truly marching into. The greatest gamble of Cyrus's life was about to begin, and their destiny, irrevocably linked to his, lay shrouded in the unforgiving dust of a foreign land. What unimaginable trials awaited them? And how would their audacious journey reshape the very narrative of power and loyalty in the ancient world? Greece, that storied land, once the hallowed ground of profound philosophers and lyrical poets, had tragically devolved into a scarred and fractured landscape. The Peloponnesian War, a brutal, fratricidal conflict, had at last sputtered to an end, yet its cessation brought little comfort. Instead, an oppressive air of suspicion hung heavy between the once proud city-states. Old alliances, forged in blood and shared purpose, lay ashen and scattered, dissolved by years of bitter strife. And thousands upon thousands of soldiers, men honed for the brutal art of war and utterly unsuited for anything else, found themselves cast adrift, their purpose stripped away. Honor, once the very bedrock of their existence, had become a distant, unaffordable luxury. The daily struggle for mere sustenance consumed their waking hours, and the distant, shimmering promise of silver that, for these men, was utterly irresistible. Cyrus's offer did not arrive with the blare of trumpets, the grandiloquent speeches of politicians, or the fluttering of patriotic banners. It arrived, rather, with the quiet, weighty clink of coin. Envoys, their ships cutting through the azure expanse of the Aegean Sea, bore not only promises of wealth and glory but also the elusive, coveted gift of purpose. In the austere barracks of Sparta, the bustling agoras of Athens, and the fortified halls of Thebes, battle-hardened warriors paused, their ears attuned. And soon, almost 10,000 hoplites, many of them hardened veterans of the very war that had shattered the Hellenic world, answered the enigmatic call. Some were drawn by the siren's song of adventure, a thirst for the unknown that gnawed at their souls. Others sought a desperate, visceral revenge against a cruel fate that had left them bereft. A select few, like the esteemed Xenophon, found themselves embarking on this monumental journey for reasons they themselves could not fully articulate, a pull more profound than mere lucre. Xenophon, indeed, was no mercenary by trade. He was an Athenian noble, a devoted student of the great Socrates, his mind more attuned to philosophical discourse than the brutal efficacy of the sword. Yet he held deep friendships among the formidable Spartans, most notably with Proxenus, and it was an unyielding loyalty to these bonds, rather than the allure of gold, that drew him into this unfolding drama. They had assured him it was a mere campaign against local rebels in distant Babylon, a standard suppression mission, nothing more than a profitable skirmish. They did not tell him that he would journey across half the known world. They did not tell him that he would one day be forced to lead a shattered army on an epic, desperate march home through unforgiving snow and the bitter sting of betrayal. As the scattered Greek contingents converged near the ancient city of Ephesus, their sprawling camp swelled like a newly burgeoning city itself. Tents, a chaotic sea of canvas, dotted the rolling hills. The rhythmic clang of blacksmiths' hammers echoed across the plains, horses were meticulously brushed, and swords, countless blades, were honed to a razor's edge. Yet amidst the fervent preparations, a strange, persistent unease began to settle over the assembled Greeks. The army, by any measure, was far too vast for a mere suppression mission. The supplies, mountains of provisions, were too abundant, too meticulously gathered for a simple skirmish. And Cyrus himself, he was far too quiet, his silence a stark contrast to the grand scale of his preparations. Still, the Greeks, pragmatic and hardened, accepted this unsettling silence. They had signed their contracts. They had received their precious silver, its weight a comforting assurance in their calloused hands. And their fierce, unyielding pride would not permit retreat, not yet. Besides, in the harsh calculus of their lives, what did it truly matter who they fought, as long as they were handsomely paid? They would soon learn, with a brutal, visceral clarity, that their true enemy was not some distant, insignificant tribe. Their true enemy, vast and unforgiving, was the empire itself. And as the final preparations were made, and the order to march loomed, one could almost hear the whispered question carried on the wind. Would these hardened warriors, bound by silver and pride, survive the unimaginable trials that awaited them in the heart of Persia? And would the world ever truly forget the odyssey of the 10,000? The army marched east, step by step, mile by mile, through Lydia, Phrygia, and into the sweltering core of Mesopotamia. But something felt off. Cyrus had told them they were heading to quell a rebellion near Babylon. Yet the distances grew longer, the maps more secretive, the silence heavier. Commanders murmured in private. Messengers arrived at night and left before dawn. And still no signs of rebellion. Supplies were overflowing. The columns of soldiers stretched too far. This wasn't a strike team, it was an invasion force. But the Greeks, bound by contracts and the weight of their own armor, kept marching. Some officers questioned openly, Others chose denial. After all, the silver was good and no blood had been spilled. Cyrus played his cards close. Only a handful of Persian loyalists knew the truth. They were marching not to suppress, but to overthrow. His plan hinged on surprise, if he could reach the capital before news spread. If he could confront Artaxerxes in open battle and kill him. The war would end in a single surgical strike. And the Greeks, they were the scalpel. Among them marched Arius, a Persian commander loyal to Cyrus. His presence was strategic, a silent signal that not all Persians stood with the king. As the army pushed deeper into enemy land, they passed Persian governors. Some stepped aside, some were bribed, none dared resist. It was a march of whispers, not war, but every mile made one thing clear. They were heading into the lion's den with no way out but forward. And the lion was waiting. September 401 BCE. The Euphrates shimmered like molten gold under the Mesopotamian sun. On the plains of Cunaxa, two armies converged. One backed by the might of the Persian Empire, the other by a prince with a dream and 10,000 strangers at his side. Artaxerxes had come prepared. His army stretched across the horizon, tens of thousands strong. Infantry, cavalry, scythed chariots, and the immortals Persia's elite feared for centuries. Cyrus had numbers, but not nearly enough. What he had was belief in himself. And in the Greeks, he placed them on his right flank, the most trusted position. Shield to shield, the hoplites stood, a wall of bronze and resolve. No songs, no shouting, only silence, and the low tremor of sandals grinding into dirt. Cyrus rode at the center, surrounded by his best Persian troops. His eyes weren't on the battlefield. They were locked on one man, his brother. If he could reach him, kill him, it would all end. Then came the thunder. The Greek phalanx surged forward, not against Persian elites, but against conscripts and local levies. The result was immediate. They shattered the opposition like a hammer through pottery. The field ahead was clear. But they had one flaw. They were too far from the center, too far from Cyrus. Cyrus, wild with determination, charged into the heart of the Persian center. He saw Artaxerxes atop his chariot. And for a moment, just a moment, their eyes met. Brothers, kings, enemies, Cyrus struck. He wounded the king. But before he could deliver the final blow, a javelin pierced his temple. He fell. His guards fought to the last, but the tide had turned. When word of Cyrus's death reached the Greeks, it was as if the sun had gone out. The battle had been won, but the war, their purpose, their employer had vanished. They were 10,000 men, alone. Stranded in the middle of an empire they had just tried to dethrone. And now every road around them led deeper into danger. The field of Cunaxa grew quiet, no cheers, no chants. Just the distant flutter of Persian banners in the wind and the heavy realization of what had been lost. Cyrus was dead, and with him so was the mission. The Greeks gathered near the battlefield, setting up a camp, half shelter, half prison. They had food, armor, weapons, but no purpose, no allies, no way home. They had not declared war on the Persian king. They had not even known they were fighting him. And now they stood on imperial soil, foreign, outnumbered, and surrounded. For days, confusion reigned. Some argued for surrender. Others dreamed of negotiating their way out. Most simply waited, hungry for orders that would never come. Then, from the east, a proposal. Tissaphernes, a Persian satrap with a sharp mind and a history of rivalry with Cyrus, offered peace. He would escort the Greeks home, on one condition: they would follow his guidance. It seemed reasonable. The Greeks, weary and lost, accepted. But trust in Persia was a currency already spent. As the days passed, the Persians began to dictate everything. The route, the pace, the rations, and slowly what had begun as an escort began to feel like a leash. Clearchus, the Spartan commander, still believed diplomacy could save them. But others, especially Xenophon, watched with growing suspicion. Then came the invitation. A summit, Tissaphernes. Xenophon knew the risks. He warned his men this was not a battlefield. They were entering a labyrinth of stone where the enemy held the high ground. Still they moved, The passes narrowed, cliffs rose on either side, and then it began, stones. Javelins, a storm from above. The Carduchians didn't fight like soldiers, they fought like ghosts. They struck from ledges and vanished into the rocks. They knew the terrain and they used it without hesitation. Every turn became an ambush. Every ridge a trap. The Greeks raised shields overhead, formed tight formations, and pushed forward inch by inch. It wasn't war, it was siege warfare in motion. Xenophon's discipline held them together. He reorganized units, placed lighter troops on flanks, coordinated rear guards to fend off surprise attacks. He didn't seek revenge, he sought progress, one step closer to home. The men fought exhaustion, blood loss, and fear. But they moved, through valleys soaked in sweat and echoing with the clash of bronze on stone. And then, after days of this brutal gauntlet, they broke through. They reached the slopes beyond the cliffs, no more javelins, no more shadows. But they didn't cheer, they didn't rest, because in the distance, snow-covered peaks waited. The mountains weren't finished with them yet. The Carduchians had tested their will. Now nature would test their endurance. Cold has no face, no banners. No mercy. As the Greeks emerged from the cliffs of Carduchia, they met a new enemy, one even the bravest warrior could not fight: winter. They entered Armenia. Gone were the dry plains and rocky valleys. Now the path was snow, wind, and ice. The mountains didn't just slow them, they tried to break them. Armor became a burden. Sandals wore thin, then tore. Some marched barefoot, wrapping their feet in cloth or nothing at all. The cold bit deeper than any sword. It numbed fingers. It froze breath, it stole sleep, and it didn't let go. Snowstorms turned the world white. Visibility dropped to nothing. Rations dwindled. Frostbite claimed men silently, first a toe, then a foot, then a life. There were no enemies to fight. Only the terrain and the slow erosion of will. Xenophon adapted. He ordered lighter gear. He coordinated short, efficient marches. He placed the weakest in the center, the strongest on the flanks. Every movement was about preservation, not victory but survival. Still, the suffering was immense. Some collapsed in the snow. Others vanished into white fog, never seen again. But the Greeks kept moving, not because of orders, not for gold, but because they refused to die here. In that frozen hell, the army learned what it meant to endure. They became something more than mercenaries. They became survivors. And one morning, when hope was all but gone, a shout rang out from the front. Thalata, Thalata. The sea, the Black Sea, they had made it, not all but enough. The hardest battle was over, or so they thought. Thalata, Thalata. The cry echoed across the snowy ridges, through the broken ranks of tired men. They ran not from fear but toward hope. There it was, glittering in the morning sun, the Black Sea, the promise of home. After months of betrayal, ambushes, starvation, and storms, this was salvation. Some wept, some laughed. Some dropped to their knees. It wasn't just a body of water. It was a symbol, proof that they had not marched in vain. At Trapezus, a Greek city on the coast, they were welcomed not as conquerors but as kin. Food, shelter, rest, they found all of it, but it didn't last. Trapezus was a haven, not a home, and Greece was still far away. The army moved westward, hugging the coast. At Anabasis, they held funeral games to honor the fallen. They remembered names, they grieved. In the land of the Mercenaries, they encountered a strange people living in wooden towers using drums and hand signals. No swords were drawn. Xenophon negotiated safe passage. They moved again, always moving, but something had changed. They were no longer running from danger. They were walking toward uncertainty. And with each village they passed, each gift offered, came a new threat, not of blades but of division. Gold, comfort, opportunity. The Greeks were out of enemy territory. Now they faced something more dangerous than war, peace. And peace, they would learn, can unravel an army faster than arrows. In war, they were united. In peace, they began to fracture. As the army moved deeper into friendly lands, discipline faded like footprints in the sand. No more ambushes, no more Persians on the horizon, only temptation. Some soldiers quarreled over loot. Others deserted, enticed by local offers of silver or land. At Heraclea Pontica, a coastal Greek city, entire units stayed behind as hired swords. The army was bleeding not from wounds but from within. Local rulers, clever and cunning, saw opportunity. They offered gifts not to the army but to individual commanders. Gold, women, favor, divide and conquer without ever lifting a sword. Xenophon saw it coming. He had led them through war, through snow, through betrayal. But this was different. The Greeks were unraveling in safety. They had fought for survival, but peace made them forget what they had endured. Xenophon called for unity. He reminded them if they fell apart now, all their sacrifice would be meaningless. We crossed Persia together. We defied death together. Shall we now be conquered by comfort? But not everyone listened. When they reached Byzantium, the end of the journey, the city closed its gates. The Spartan governor feared them, 10,000 armed veterans with no master. Only after tense negotiations were they allowed to enter, disarmed, and disbanded. Some joined new armies, some vanished into the streets, others simply went home alone. The 10,000 became the many scattered, silent, gone, their story almost forgotten, almost. In the quiet that followed, one man wrote. Xenophon, soldier, survivor, philosopher, took pen to parchment. He called it Anabasis. Not just a chronicle of war, but a tribute to resilience, to leadership born of necessity, to the human spirit when left with no allies but itself. He didn't glorify conquest. He wrote about hunger, fear, betrayal, hope. He wrote for those who would one day find themselves lost and wonder if survival was still possible. Years later, a young Macedonian general would read it. His name was Alexander. When Alexander the Great marched east, beyond the known world, he carried with him Xenophon's Anabasis. Not as a map, but as a guide for what to do when plans collapse, when men falter, when gods go silent. And that's the legacy. Not the battles, not the sea, but the choice again and again to keep moving forward. The 10,000 were never meant to be remembered. They were mercenaries, expendable, forgotten, but through Anabasis' asterisk they became more than men, they became